There is a roast sitting in my refrigerator right now that cost me $9.40 a pound uncovered on a wire rack, and it has been sitting there since last night. And by the time I am done with it, it is going to carry itself to the table looking like something that cost you $140 at a steakhouse with a man at the door who takes your coat. I am not going to tell you which cut it is yet, because if I tell you now, half of you are going to shut this off, thinking you already know that story. You do not. It will not need a smoker. It will not need a sous vide machine humming next to your coffee maker. It will not need a dry aging cabinet or a special fridge or a subscription box of anything showing up on your porch. It will not need 40 minutes of active work once it goes in the oven. It will not need you standing over it with tongs. It will not cost you $1 more than what is already sitting in your kitchen cabinet. It does one thing. It takes a cut that most people are scared of, and it makes it behave like the centerpiece of a holiday table. My name is Frank Miller. I cut meat for 31 years, most of it behind one block. And before that block was mine, it belonged to another man. And before this channel ever existed, I helped a corporate office decide where every single cut in that case gets placed. The rib and the loin sit up at eye level under a pink light somebody is paid to choose. And the leg this roast came off sits low in the case, sometimes down by the ground beef, where a man your age has to bend and squint at a label he cannot even read properly. That is not an accident, and I am going to be honest with you the way a man ought to be about a video with a big claim sitting right there in the title. This is not a trick. There is no trick in any of this. It is a method, and the difference matters because a trick works once and a method works every single Sunday for the rest of your life. So stay with me. Here is the roast, top round, boneless, 9 pounds. It came off the hindquarter, and I paid right around $7 to $9 a pound for it, which on a 9-pound piece is somewhere between $60 and $80 for a roast that is going to sit down 10 people at a table, 400 degrees warmer, 10 trays deep, and eat like the piece your steakhouse charges you $14 a slice for on a Friday night. And before you write this off as a Chuck story, this is not the shoulder, this is the leg. And the leg is where a lot of you were told the tough meat lives, and you were not lied to exactly. You were told half of it, because a working muscle is a working muscle, whether it holds the spine up or carries 600 pounds of animal across a field. But a working muscle answers to heat differently than a lazy one does. And that difference is the whole video. Here is the reframe, and I want you to write it down somewhere, because it explains every single thing I am about to show you. Tenderness is not about the cut. Tenderness is about what you do to the muscle after it leaves the animal. A ribeye forgives a bad cook because it is carrying its own fat through the middle of it. A round has almost none of that fat, so a round does not forgive you. It either gets the technique or it gets thrown in a napkin under the table. That is the whole trade in one sentence, and I learned it the hard way standing next to a man named Walt. Walt had the block before I ever touched it. He came home from Korea and went straight behind the glass, and he did not explain a single thing before he did it. He would set a roast down, truss it, salt it, and walk away. And if you had not been watching, he was not going to do it again for your benefit. I was 19 the first time I watched him take a top round, the same cut sitting in my fridge right now, and truss it up tight as a drum, salt it heavy, and slide it onto a rack in the walk-in overnight. And I asked him why we were not just roasting the good stuff, the rib, the loin. And he looked at me the way a man looks at somebody who has not yet earned the answer. And he said, "The good stuff sells itself, son. This is the one that pays my mortgage," because he was buying the round for his own family every single Sunday for 30 years. He never once told me it was cheap. He told me it was correct. And there is a difference between those two words that took me another decade to understand. Here is the mechanism, and this is the part a restaurant will not walk you through because it takes them 4 sentences of dead air on a menu that is trying to sell you a $38 plate. Salt goes on the outside of that roast the night before, and for the first half hour, it pulls moisture up out of the meat. which looks wrong and is the entire reason people quit doing this too early. Then that moisture dissolves the salt into a brine, and the brine gets pulled back down into the muscle, seasoning it from the inside instead of sitting on the surface like sand on a beach. At the same time, the salt is loosening the muscle fibers so they hold on to more of their own juice once heat hits them. And overnight in a refrigerator, uncovered on a rack, the surface of that roast is also drying out, which matters more on a big roast than on any steak, because a wet roast cannot crust, it steams, and a steamed roast comes out the color of a gray blanket instead of the color of a good sundae. Then comes the part that is actually stolen straight out of a professional kitchen, and it is the same principle as cooking a steak backwards: gentle heat first for a long time, then a short, violent blast of heat at the very end. On a roast this size, you are looking at somewhere around 3.5 hours at 225 degrees to bring the center up nice and slow to about 120 degrees. And because the heat comes up so gradually and so evenly, there is no gray band of overcooked meat sitting under the crust the way there is on a roast somebody blasted in a 400-degree oven. From the first minute, the whole roast, edge to edge, ends up almost the exact same shade of pink. And here is the sentence I want you to sit with, because it is the one that pays off the whole title of this video. A roast cooked this way cannot be overcooked in the way you are afraid of, because you are pulling it based on a number on a thermometer and not based on a guess. An instant read thermometer costs less than what you would tip the man who parks your car at a steakhouse, and it is the only tool on this entire list I am going to tell you to go and buy. The consistency you are paying $14 a slice for at that restaurant is not talent standing behind the glass, it is measurement. A cook running 400 of these through the same oven every week with a probe in his apron pocket. You can own that same measurement for about $18. What you cannot own is his 400 a week, and with a thermometer in your hand, you do not need it. And that 6 to 8 ounces of trim you cut off the outside of this thing, the fat and the little bit of muscle attached to it, that is not garbage that goes straight into a pot later on and becomes the base of a sauce that most kitchens are charging you $11 extra for on the side of the plate. That right there is the $10 roast eating like the $100 dinner. That is the whole trick, and it cost you a night in your own refrigerator and a thermometer. Now the crust is not even the best part of this. There is one more thing coming that the steakhouse cannot do at all. Now, before I get into it, one thing and one time only, there is more of this than I can fit in any video. How to shop Costco without getting taken. What every cut is really worth, and the words to say at the counter to get it. How to cut and prepare your own meat the way we do it behind the block. Dry aging in your own refrigerator. And every recipe I never gave out, I put all of it in a book at frankmillerbutcher.com. Link in my bio or scan the code on your screen. That is the only time you will hear me say it. Now let us get back to the meat. Now, before that roast goes anywhere near an oven, I want to tell you the one thing I got wrong for years, because I owe you the honest version of this and not just the flattering one. I used to tell people resting a roast at the very end after it comes out hot was the whole secret. And when I actually started timing it and weighing what came out onto the cutting board, the difference between a long rest at the end and almost no rest at the end was a good deal smaller than I had been telling people for 20 years. The rest that actually matters happens in the middle of this process, not at the end of it. And I will show you exactly where. Let us get into it. The exact way I do this at home, starting with the roast itself, top round, boneless. Look for one with a little bit of fat on the outside and small white flecks running through the middle of the muscle. That marbling is doing real work even on a lean cut like this. Take a boning knife or a chef's knife if that is what you have, and find the heavier pockets of fat on the outside. Trim those down gently until you just see muscle and stop right there, because on a rib roast, you want to leave the fat. On a round, you want most of it gone, since it is not going to render the same way and it will only get in the way of your crust. And while you are trimming, look for anything silvery and shiny, almost like a strip of packing tape stuck to the meat that is silver skin. It is pure connective tissue. It does not cook down no matter how long you leave it in there, and it chews like a rubber band. Slide your knife in shallow underneath it. Hold the flap up with your other hand and saw gently with the blade tilted up slightly so you are shaving off the silver skin and as little muscle as possible. Why does this step matter more on a round than on a ribeye? Because a ribeye can hide a little bit of silver skin under all that fat and marbling. A round has nowhere for a mistake to hide. Once it is trimmed, truss it, and I know that word scares people who have never done it, but it is 2 loops of string and a knot. Get yourself about 10 to 11 feet of butcher's twine. Go in about an inch from one end of the roast. Loop the twine around twice and tie it into a double knot. That is called a Swiss knot in the trade. Then keep wrapping around the roast every inch to inch and a half, pulling snug each time until you reach the other end. Why truss it at all? Because an untrussed roast this size cooks unevenly. The thin edges finish long before the thick center does, and trussing pulls it into one even cylinder so the whole thing comes up to temperature together. Once you have your wraps down one side, flip it and run the tail end of your twine under every other wrap the whole way back. Tie it off and trim the excess. Salt it heavy on every surface, about 1.5 tablespoons for a roast this size. Hold your hand a good foot above it while you salt so it falls evenly instead of clumping in one spot. Then set it on a rack over a sheet tray and into the refrigerator uncovered. Anywhere from 4 hours if you are in a hurry, up to about 48 hours if you planned ahead. And I let mine go overnight, 16 to 18 hours, which is the sweet spot for a roast this size. Why does this need to sit that long uncovered? Because that dry, cold air in your refrigerator is doing the same job the salt did on the inside. It is pulling every bit of surface moisture off the outside of that roast, and a dry surface is the only kind of surface that will ever give you a proper crust. This is the exact reason a roast wrapped tight in plastic straight from the store never browns the same way one that sat uncovered overnight does. Plastic traps the moisture the fridge is trying to pull off, and a wet surface has to boil that water away before it can even begin to brown, which costs you heat you needed for the crust and not the center. Take it out about 30 minutes before it goes in the oven just to take the deep chill off. Season it generously with fresh cracked pepper, about 3/4 teaspoon, and push your thermometer in from the top down into the very center. Never from the side, because every time you slice this roast later, a hole from the side is a hole you will see in every single slice. Oven goes to 225, no fan if you have the option, middle rack, and now you wait for a 9-pound roast that is roughly 3.5 hours to hit an internal temperature of about 120 degrees. There is a mistake almost everybody makes at the resting stage, and it undoes the whole 4 hours, and it is this. People pull the roast, tent it loosely with foil so steam can escape, and think they are done, when in fact loose foil lets the crust you have not even built yet go soft before you ever get to the sear. What you want instead is to cover it completely and let it sit anywhere from 30 to 90 minutes while the internal temperature climbs a few more degrees and the muscle relaxes and evens out. That middle rest is the only rest this roast needs, and once you sear it at the end, you do not need to rest it again at all. That is the trap. Resting twice does nothing for a roast built this way, and it only costs you a hot dinner while that roast rests. This is where you build the two things that turn dinner into an occasion. First, a garlic herb butter. Grate about 6 cloves of garlic. Melt 2 tablespoons of butter in a pan over low-medium heat with the garlic sitting right on top of it so it does not scorch. Cook it 30 to 45 seconds just until it smells like something. Whip 2 full sticks of softened butter in a mixer until it goes light and fluffy. Fold in that cooked garlic along with 2 tablespoons each of minced parsley and chives. Salt and pepper it hard because you are not eating this plain. Taste it. It should taste almost too strong on its own. That is correct. Second, a gravy built entirely from the trim you saved earlier, because here is a fact worth knowing. There are no pan drippings with this method. Every drop of juice stayed inside the meat instead of pooling in a tray, so your gravy has to come from somewhere else. Dice 1 shallot, 1 carrot, 1 rib of celery. Saute them in butter with your saved trim, some garlic, thyme, parsley, rosemary, until everything browns. Deglaze with half a cup of dry red wine. Scrape up everything stuck to the bottom of that pan. Add 8 cups of good beef stock. Reduce it by about a quarter. Thicken it with a beurre meunier, equal parts butter and flour. Work together with your hands. Whisk that in a little at a time. Cook it another 5 to 10 minutes to cook out the raw flour taste. Skim it as you go. Strain it through a fine mesh strainer, pushing hard on the solids to get every bit of flavor through. And finish it with 1 more tablespoon of butter for shine. That sauce right there is doing the job an entire sauce station does in a restaurant kitchen, and it cost you the parts of the roast that most people throw in the trash. Now the scope limit. And I want to say this plainly because I am not going to oversell you the way a cooking show with a sponsor might. This does not work on every cut, and it will not fix a cut that has no structure to it. Do not try this exact method on stew meat. It has already been cut into pieces too small to hold that low, slow heat properly, and do not expect a round to eat exactly like a rib roast. It will not. It will get you most of the way there for a fraction of the money, but the rib roast is still the rib roast, and there is a reason it cost what it cost. If you overcook the round even a little past what I am telling you, it will go dry and stringy because it does not have a rib roast fat running through it to bail you out. This method buys you almost all of the room a fattier cut gives you for free, but it does not erase the difference entirely. And anybody telling you a $9 roast becomes identical to a $90 one has not cooked one side by side and looked. I am not telling you that. Here is the piece nobody shows you because it happens after most cameras would have already stopped. Once that roast comes out of its rest, crank your oven all the way up to 500 degrees, fan on if you have convection, and slide the roast back in uncovered for 10 to 15 minutes, just long enough to build a deep brown crust on the outside while barely nudging the internal temperature. This is the exact move a steakhouse kitchen calls a finishing blast, and it is the same principle behind cooking a steak backwards. Gentle the whole way, violent for a few minutes at the very end. When it comes out, spread that garlic herb butter over the top while it is still hot enough to melt straight into the crust. And here is the thing that throws people every time. When you slice into a roast cooked this way, it is going to look almost too red for a second, and your brain is going to tell you it is undercooked. Give it a few seconds sitting on the board, and that color settles into a proper medium rare all the way through edge to edge, with almost none of that gray ring most people think is just what roast beef looks like, because most people have never eaten one without it. Your butcher is going to tell you this cut cannot be done this way, and he is wrong, and I will tell you why he says it anyway. Because most butchers behind a glass today were never taught to sell a round as anything but pot roast or stew meat. That is not a knock on the man. It is a knock on what got taught, and it did not used to be that way. Let me tell you about a woman named Carol, because this is the part of the video that never makes it into anybody else's. Carol used to buy a small prime rib every Christmas for 4 people and dread the bill every single year. I gave her this exact roast 2 winters back, top round, same method, same numbers, and she called me the following week to tell me her brother-in-law, who has opinions about beef the way some men have opinions about trucks, asked her twice where she found a rib roast that size for a table of 10. She never corrected him. She told me she just refilled his glass and let him keep thinking it. That is the whole trade secret sitting right there in one phone call. A man who has eaten beef his entire life could not tell the difference once the technique was right. And while we are on the subject of what your own kitchen tells you that a label cannot, the United States Department of Agriculture's own beef grading standards from 1997 note plainly that the quality grade is assessed almost entirely off marbling visible at the ribeye, which is why a lean cut like this round rarely carries a grade worth mentioning at all. The grade was never built with this cut in mind, so do not go looking for one. Look at the roast itself instead. Wonbred sembus, widum sois, widum no for withstand. So many peas. My wife has never once called this a special occasion meal. She calls it Sunday, and she has strong opinions about the second freezer in the garage where 4 or 5 of these end up wrapped and dated at a time. She says I am hoarding. I tell her I am provisioning. We have had that argument for about 15 years now, and neither one of us has won it. Some of you are already thinking 3 things, and they come up in the comments every single week. So let me get to them now. First, does this really work on a cheaper roast like a bottom round or a sirloin roast? Yes, the timing shifts a little depending on the shape and the size, but the method is identical. Salt overnight, low and slow, blast it at the end. Second, can I skip the truss if I do not have twine? You can, but your roast will cook less evenly and your slices will come out uneven at the ends. Twine costs almost nothing. It is sold in any hardware store or butcher supply house, and it is worth having in a drawer for the rest of your life. And third, and this is the one that matters most, your butcher or your uncle or the cooking show your mother watches is going to tell you a round cannot hold a crust the way a ribeye does. And he says that because in a restaurant kitchen, a round almost never gets the 18 hours in a refrigerator this method needs. Restaurants do not have a night to spare on a piece of meat that is not going to sell for premium money. At home, you have exactly that night, and that is your advantage, not theirs. Now, I want to give you 5 things 31 years behind a block taught me about this exact cut that nobody at a counter is going to say out loud. 1, the direction you slice matters more on a round than on almost any other cut in the store. Find the grain running through the meat and cut straight across it in thin slices, about a 1/4 inch. Cutting with the grain instead of against it turns this exact same roast into something you are chewing for a week. 2, save every bit of that trim, 6 to 8 ounces off a roast this size, because that trim is the entire base of a gravy that would otherwise need pan drippings you do not have. 3, a thermometer inserted from the top instead of the side keeps every single slice clean when you finally cut into it, and that is a presentation trick nobody tells home cooks. 4, this exact roast freezes beautifully once it is cooked and sliced, wrapped tight with the air pressed out, so a 9-pound roast on a Sunday can become 4 or 5 weeknight dinners without you touching a stove again. And 5, that herb butter you make for this roast, make double. It freezes just as well, and it turns a plain weeknight chicken breast into something worth setting a table for. And one more for good measure, since this one surprises people every time. The color of this roast, the moment it comes out of that long, slow oven, is going to look almost purple, a deep wine-colored red that makes half of you nervous. That color is oxygen-starved myoglobin, and it has nothing to do with doneness. Give it air during that middle rest, and it blooms back to a proper rosy red on its own. Nobody needs to panic about a roast that looks like that coming out of a 225-degree oven. Let me put the whole thing in numbers, because the arithmetic is the argument. A 9-pound top round runs somewhere between $60 and $80, depending on where you shop and what week it is, that feeds 10 people generously with leftovers. The same 10 people eating an equivalent cut at a steakhouse are looking at well over $400 before anybody orders a drink. There is no meeting where somebody decided to keep this off the menu of every cooking show with a sponsor. There was no meeting. It is quieter than that. A technique that takes 18 hours does not fit into a 30-minute segment with a sponsor to please, and a cut this cheap does not carry the margin that pays for the airtime, so it quietly stopped getting taught, and one generation was all it took. Here is the number that ought to bother you. The whole reason beef costs what it costs right now is that the national cattle herd is the smallest it has been since the early 1950s. And that does not fix itself in a season. It fixes itself over years. And what I watched happen from behind the glass for 3 decades is that a big Sunday roast for the whole family quietly turned into something reserved for a holiday twice a year, and nobody ever announced it. They just started buying smaller. I had a man come in every single Friday for 11 years for the exact same order, and near the end of my time behind that counter, he started coming every other week instead, then once a month. And he never once said a word about why he did not need to. I knew his order and I knew his silence. And that is what a price rise actually looks like from the other side of the glass. It does not look like anger. It looks like a good man quietly deciding beef is not for his family the way it used to be, and never once saying so out loud to anybody, including himself. You have not been priced out of a proper Sunday roast. You have been priced out of the 8% of the animal that everybody fights over, and this cut is sitting in the other 92% the whole time at a third of the price, waiting on the exact technique I just gave you. So here is your homework. Buy a top round boneless somewhere between 7 and 9 pounds. Trim the heavy fat and every bit of silver skin. Truss it every inch to inch and a half. Salt it heavy and let it sit uncovered on a rack overnight. Low oven at 225 until it hits about 120 degrees in the center. Cover it completely and rest it 30 to 90 minutes. Blast it at 500 for 10 to 15 minutes to build the crust. Finish it with garlic herb butter. Build your gravy from the trim while it rests and slice it thin against the grain. Total cost somewhere around $70 for 10 people. Total hands-on time under an hour spread across a whole day. Tell me down in the comments what a top round is running at your store this week and what state or country you are shopping in, because prices are moving everywhere right now. They are not the same in Ohio as they are in Texas, and I read every single one of these. Next time, since we have been talking about turning the leg of the animal into something worth setting a table for, I am going to show you what to do with a bottom round roast, the toughest one on this list, and the one trick that gets it almost all the way to where this one landed. It is the natural next step after today. If you got something useful out of this one, subscribe and the next will find you on its own. There is another sat there on the screen that goes right along with it. Buy the working muscle, cook it slow, cut it thin,